Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land. I hope that you are happily sailing down Joyful Avenue before taking a left turn onto Life Couldn't Be Better Drive. In this video, what we're going to do is take a look at 10 books to help you get started in the classics. If you don't know where to begin, these books are accessible, highly enjoyable, and a good introduction to classic literature and what it's all about. So, without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? Our first book that we're going to take a look at just happens to be the oldest one in the list as well, and it is Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Can you believe this book was written 308 years ago, but still reads like a modern novel? In fact, some say this is the first modern novel, and it's hard to disagree with them. Some people think Robinson Crusoe is a children's story. It's not. This book strikes at what it really means to exist. Of course, Robinson Crusoe has some adventures on the seas before he's washed up on a desert island where he will spend 20 years alone working out how to survive. And through it, we get a sense of what really matters in life, what's important. We get a sense of adventure. We get the sense of a thrill of trying to exist. And that still resonates with us, that primal urge, because how many people now do bushcraft and try and live in a wilderness for umpteen days without anything but a pocket knife and a ham sandwich? Robinson Crusoe does it all. And after 20 years, he finds a footprint in the sand. Oh, shocker. How does it all work out? This book is a great, great read and introduces you to the lovely flavours of proper language. The way it flows and undulates is just gorgeous. So I recommend this one definitely. The next one that I thought I'd put on this list of 10 classics to introduce you to classic literature is a modern one. It's Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. A very, very interesting classic, very easy to read and get into. And while not written like the 19th century literature, the reason you could call this a classic is because of the way it speaks to the societal and human condition of modernity and its warning societal message. It's almost as if Ray Bradbury has sensed the decline in reading in modern civilization and takes that idea to a much further, almost dystopian world where books are banned. This features the fireman, Guy Montag, and fireman means he burns things, he sets things on fire, namely books. So what's so dangerous about books? What is a world like in which books are banned and don't exist, and hence we no longer have the ability just to chew over a thought of an author and think for ourselves, rather we're spoon-fed pleasure by the state? A very interesting and straightforwardly written book, which has had a remarkable effect on a lot of people. So if you're getting into classics and want to start with something more modern, Fahrenheit 451 is your book. In my list of 10 books to get you into the classics, 2 of them have been swiped from my bookshelves. I don't know where they've gone. Now, I believe the one I'm about to talk about is my own fault. I was only reading it a few weeks ago, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Can you believe Mary Shelley was only 18 to 19 when she wrote this book? She wrote it under a pseudonym at the time because no one would ever have thought that a girl of 18 could write literature for people to sincerely read. And yet it blew everybody away. It was amazing. And if you're interested in getting into the Gothic genre of literature, this is definitely the place to start. It's a short book, but it's excellent. It dives into the meaning of society, or the meaning of being a human, in the sense that it deals with what it's like to be an outcast, to be spurned by society, to have no place to call home, as it were, and the desire for revenge if one is denied love. So that's number 3, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Next up is a beautiful short book of about 100 pages. But boy oh boy is it a classic piece of work. It is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. This book won Hemingway the Nobel Prize for Literature. And my. It's just, the reason I put it here, it's just beautiful writing. It's a simple story. There's barely any dialogue. It's of a man who hasn't caught a fish for a long time, but he's an old man. He goes out to sea to catch a fish. Not a particular one, like in Moby Dick, just to catch a fish. And the ensuing story that happens between him and a marlin. And it's just so well written. It's beautiful. Some people might say this book is boring, but I defy that. Just let yourself feel the beating down sun of the Caribbean. Feel the pull of the strain on the fishing wire across your back. Taste the salt of the sea. Feel the tingle of the salt as it cleans your cut hands. Taste the fish that's being eaten to sustain life. Look at the stars overhead. Feel the breeze in your face. Think about a life that's been lived and what it all adds up to and what really true joy is and contentment and happiness. This is a masterpiece. Now, when I was thinking of these books to start reading the classics, I didn't think any list would actually be complete without a Charles Dickens. But the problem with Charles Dickens is he does so many good books and so many famous ones that which one do you pick? Well, Great Expectations came to my mind, and that is a tremendous book. But it's not everyone's favourite when they first read Dickens, so I thought to pass on that. Tale of Two Cities, again, is a great place, and I thought of starting there. However, it's unlike most of Dickens, and so I hit upon this. Oliver Twist, which is one of the books, if you've seen my other video, 12 books I will be reading this year. Oliver Twist is on it. I've already read it once. I want to read it again because it is amazing. If you're into social commentary, but into brilliant characterization, and even into world building in your reading, read Oliver Twist. Although Dickens doesn't have to build an imaginary fantasy world, he almost cloaks old London in the realm of fantasy with the brilliance of his penmanship and the way he sketches out characters from 150, 200 years ago whom we look at and say, I know that character. I know what they're like. I've got a friend like them. But they're so overblown and grotesque in here. You've got Sykes and you've got Fagin and the Artful Dodger and of course Oliver himself. It's just a miracle of storytelling. I mean, a miracle. You must read this book. You will enjoy it so much. It also, although large, is nowhere near the massive behemoths that he often writes, like Martin Chuzzlewit, David Copperfield, Dombey and Son. This is a reasonably sized book, but it goes at a fair lick because it's so enjoyable. So, Oliver Twist, if you like social commentary, reform movements, or world building. Do you like a good tearjerker? Do you like to have something that rips out your heart and hands it to you on a plate? You know, in the way that makes you think, oh, I feel so sad and overwhelmed, but it's wonderful. The Glorious Melancholy, I think it's called. Well, the next book is just for you. TESS of the D'Urbervilles. Now, I have a full review of this book, in depth, if you want to take it to another level. But just reading TESS of the D'Urbervilles for its story will knock your socks off. It focuses on young Tess, who gets assaulted early on by someone that should have taken care of her, but she's working for him thinking he's related, but he's not. How she moves away to start a new life, how she finds love and how everything goes wrong yet again. This book will break your heart. And it will leave you without breath at the final scene. Like standing on the seashore, staring across the ocean and becoming suddenly aware of your own loneliness and smallness. You know how that takes your breath away? This book will do the same thing. So, highly recommend it. Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. How about an adventure book? Do you like something that just gallops through the pages? You can't put it down. It's non-stop action all the time. It's like a Hollywood blockbuster with all the special effects. Well, that's the next book, and that's the one some foul cretin has pinched from my library, so I can't show you my personal copy. But it is from the lion of French literature, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. My goodness. D'Artagnan, Porthos, Athos, Aramis. They're there. It's the book in which they meet. Three of them know each other, but D'Artagnan turns up. And it's the beginning of a whole sequence of books where D'Artagnan raises through the ranks, culminating in The Man in the Iron Mask. And this book, apart from maybe the first 3 or 4 chapters, which gives you the setting where D'Artagnan is from, and he's first going into Paris and observing Paris and getting his quarters. Apart from that bit where you get quite a number of French names as well, once this book gets going and you see the man in the black cloak, from that point you are gripped. And it doesn't stop with the man in the black coat. You find Milady, who is equally mysterious and charming and alluring. You meet one of the most malevolent characters in literature in this book. And not malevolent because he's sadistic or twisted, angry, violent, brilliant at fighting. It's because he oozes cunning. And he oozes self-mastery and grandeur. And he is the Cardinal Richelieu. My goodness, he doesn't appear much, but when he does, when D'Artagnan first meets him, the temperature in your room will drop by 2 degrees. So that's the next book, and you will not believe what happens at the end. The films do not come close to doing this book any justice. Most of the time, they just can't keep up with how fast the book is, so they change the plot altogether in the films. You must read this if you're into action. It is A1. Top notch. Spiffing. Oojar cum spiff. You've got to read it. What classic do you think, or would you recommend to someone who's starting in the classics for romance? I bet there's a few that come to mind. The one I've picked, unsurprisingly, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Jane Austen is a remarkable authoress. I mean, remarkable. The lightness of her touch in the way she writes, but the elegance which embroiders it all together, and the wit which brings it doesn't make you guffaw, but it brings a wry smile to your cheek. She takes a shot at some of the hauteur that's within the men of society, but she also needles very much the women of her day. And who do we have in here? Mr. Darcy and Miss Eliza Bennet and Miss Eliza Bennet's sisters. You will get through this very quickly. You will love some of the letters that are written. And I would say one of the things about this book in particular is this one begins to really expand your recognition of how words can conjure up emotions and sensations and stretch the mind more than I would say modern literature can do. Just the elegance of writing in this book is in itself worth reading, but the story is so good, and the comical characters that you find just threaded at the fringe. I'm thinking of the vicar, Mr. Collins, for any of you who are wondering who I find amusing. Some people will aim to not read this book because they think, well, everyone's read it, I want to read something new. If you want to get started in the classics, take this book. It's just so good. For an entry list into the classics, I thought, now what could we look at for the mystery detective genre? Well, that was easy as anything, because this book, or this group of books, in my opinion, are still the definitive detective stories. And it's no surprise, Sherlock Holmes. Oh my days, this detective rocks. I mean, no one in all detective literature comes anywhere close to this guy for his unassailable logic and mind-bending deductive skills. I don't know if you know this, but it used to be, if you worked at Scotland Yard in England, I think it was somewhere up to the 1950s or something, it was compulsory that you read all of Sherlock Holmes, because it's not just made up detection where the author has started with the murderer and worked his way backwards and then placed the clues along the route. This is just logic that will have you dribbling. You will be going online after this looking for books like How to Detect Like Sherlock Holmes, How to Read People. It's unreal what he does. Now, I'm not saying you have to read all of it, although it's quite addictive when you get started with one. The Study in Scarlet is my favourite. Now, to give you an idea of his deductive abilities, when he meets Watson, first of all, he tells Watson that he's from the army, and Watson wants to know how he knows that. And Sherlock, just describing what he's wearing, the way he walks and the colour of his skin, tells him that he's been in the army, he's a doctor, and he's been fighting in Afghanistan. And you think, like Watson, well, no one can really know that. And then Conan Doyle, the author, explains how Sherlock worked it out. And you sit there flabbergasted, thinking, wow, I wish I could do that. You then see him take a watch of Watson's, because Watson thinks someone's told him about my career in the army. So he just hands Sherlock a watch and says, tell me something about the owner of that watch. Guess what? Sherlock tells so much that Watson feels angry, as if he's been duped. And then Sherlock explains how he worked it all out. It's so remarkable and flawless that you will want to be Sherlock Holmes. Forget Poirot, forget all the others, forget Harlan Coben, even though I do enjoy his books. Sherlock Holmes is the god of detectives. No one has ever come close to matching him. You must read Sherlock Holmes. Now, the book I've got here that's about to come up, it's got a tint of the dark side to it, but is wrapped in absolute wit. Now, if you know your wits from the past, you won't be surprised to see Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The first few chapters in this exquisite piece of work, they make you marvel. There's a guy in it called Lord Henry Wotton, and the way he speaks, you know he just has the most plum accent, and he's devilishly charming, and he's so laid back about everything, and he just loves pleasure. You know, he's one of those characters, and the quintessential English rake. But Dorian Gray, he wants to have perpetual youth by means of a painting which takes all of the aging process off him onto the painting. And all the things that make us crinkle up and wrinkly and horrid because of anguish and agony and doing vile things, and those things which leave an effect on a human body, they get transferred to the painting so that Dorian can live a life however he likes. But through this book, Oscar Wilde seems to take a little bit of an aim at a philosophy that he himself subscribed to, which was the philosophy of aesthetics, that beauty is the highest thing to aim for. What happens to Dorian, though, leaves you wondering whether Oscar Wilde was losing his confidence in that way of looking at things. A really interesting read, and I know for a lot of people it's their favourite book of all time. Finally, finishing off our 10 books to begin the classics, I thought we'd look at the comedy genre. Often people don't think of comedy when they think of classics. However, humour is universal, but sometimes what makes a classic is the grandeur of its language, the sheer brilliance with the quill and ink. Shakespeare was brilliant with language. No one like him. Maybe next to Shakespeare in the ability to wield a pen is P.G. Wodehouse. You'll know P.G. Wodehouse if I were to say Jeeves and Wooster, the classic silly Englishman and his brainy valet Jeeves. The language that P.G. Wodehouse uses to write is simply not found anywhere else. People have tried to emulate him, but they don't get close. But this guy, oh my, this is the first book I ever laughed at out loud while I was on a bus, and I couldn't contain myself. It just made me laugh that much. And if you know anything about a proper Englishman, if there's one thing we fear more than death, it's embarrassing ourselves in public. So snorting out a load of Coca-Cola while reading on a bus, you know, I wouldn't have done that just for effect. It was just I could not help it. In fact, I may just read you a tiny bit right now. Sit back. The way he starts, and you don't have to get this one, which is called Very Good Jeeves. Any Jeeves and Wooster by P.G. Wodehouse, start with them, written in the first person, and they're just a hoot. I'll read this. There are some which have me crying on the first page, but this one, still good. Jeeves in the Impending Doom. It says here, it was the morning of the day on which I was slated to pop down to my Aunt Agatha's place at Woolham, Chersey, in the county of Hertfordshire, for a visit of 3 solid weeks. And, as I seated myself at the breakfast table, I don't mind confessing that the heart was singularly heavy. We Woosters are men of iron, but beneath my intrepid exterior at that moment there lurked a nameless dread. Jeeves, I said, I am not the old merry self this morning. Indeed, sir? No, Jeeves, far from the old merry self. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. He uncovered the fragrant eggs and bacon, and I pronged a moody forkful. Who else speaks like that? He uncovered the eggs and bacon, and I pronged a moody forkful. That is magic in ink. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed that video of 10 books to get you into classic literature. Every single one of them is dynamite, so take your pick. I just wanted to get an eclectic mix from different genres depending on who's watching this. Can I ask you, in the comments, would you leave a comment over which book intrigues you the most? Which one you think you would start with? Or if you've read them all, which ones did you enjoy and which ones would you recommend for others to get started in the classics? If you love books, classic literature, and want to get deep into classic literature, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so that you don't miss any of the videos where I take a classic book and review it in depth. We're talking 30, 40 minutes of really going beyond the story in the classics and being able to get so much more joy out of your reading by being able to see far more that is stored in the book that's coming from the author's brain to us. So hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I wish you joy in your reading.